Hello everyone, I'm Justice Graves and this is my campaign channel. I am currently running to be a member of the school committee for the Narragansett Regional School District, which serves the towns of Templeton and Phillipston, Massachusetts. And first, I want to just say a great big welcome to everybody who has recently subscribed. I know there have been more subscribers since the last time I even did a video, so I really appreciate that. Today's video is going to be under a new playlist topic called Leadership and Cooperation. That is in a playlist that is on this channel, going to be filtered into one. And the topic of today is going to be an introduction to exercises in quality leadership. This is something that I have talked about that I wanted to discuss on the channel for a little bit now. It is something that I am familiar with, and I will explain why I'm familiar with quality practices in leadership in just a few seconds. But it's something that I've been focused on. I've been, trying to prepare these different videos. There are going to be 7 videos in total on this. Is going to be the introduction and the conclusion on this playlist, and then there's going to be the 5 important videos in the middle that I hope you will watch and listen to. I will try and get all of those done within the next 6 days, so hopefully they are of good quality when I publish them. Now, the reason why this is so important is because when I was in college, I was the president of what is called the National Leadership Honor Society, or I was the president of my university's chapter of the National Leadership Honor Society. The title of it is called Omicron Delta Kappa. It's not a sorority, it's not a fraternity, it's just they use the Greek letters for that. And there are chapters all over the country. There's different people who have had high leadership recognition in politics and in government who been a member of the society before they graduated from college. That's just how it is. And when I became president, there was a biennial convention. They voted later to make it an annual convention. Biennial means every 2 years is a convention. Now it's an annual convention every single year. We went to the biennial version of it down in Nashville, Tennessee, and at that convention, we talked a lot about that there was a growing leadership crisis in the United States, and that there was a growing divide between the young and the old, how people were not communicating as efficiently, how there were problems with the political divide, how there were problems in the way that we communicate, how communication was failing, how people weren't trusting each other, how there were major issues going on in society. We didn't really get into the political issues, obviously. We were talking about the behaviors, the personal behaviors of people, and how to improve your own personal behaviors in order to bridge those divides. But that was really one of the major topics of that conversation of that convention, because everybody who was a guest speaker there was from a different political background, a different background in terms of their experiences, whether it was in terms of sports or in terms of their careers or in terms of actually being people who do different teamwork and collaboration building activities. So that was really important. Today's video is going to be in slideshow format, and again, it's going to be the introduction on exercises in quality leadership and introduction presented by me. We are going to go to the next slide. And before we even start, I want to tell you that we are going through this from a student's perspective because I am running for school committee. We are using the Student Leadership Challenge by James Kozos and Barry Posner as the book, because this is the book that I'm familiar with, and the workbook that supports it. As you can see right here, the Student Leadership Challenge workbook. And the reason why is because this book in particular is not just about, well, what it is it's part of a longitudinal study, a long-term longitudinal study, and in a bit I will explain what a longitudinal study is. But essentially what we're looking at is that when it comes to good leadership behaviors, gender, ethnicity, school year, and experience on leadership, it doesn't really matter. And I will actually quote page 17 of the book, so give me a second to find that page because I have it marked. Quote from the authors, "Our research also revealed something else that's extremely important. The effective use of the 5 practices is not affected by gender, ethnicity, age, or year in school. To sum it all up, what matters as a leader is how you behave." End quote. And we'll talk about what are the 5 practices, because that's something that was just mentioned in this quote. The reason why that's important is that it doesn't matter where you start, doesn't matter where you end. And with regards to this longitudinal study, they did look at, students, in high school and in the beginning of college for this as well, so this is very applicable. that immutable characteristics don't matter. What matters is personal behavior. The individual affects the group. And that the group doesn't have to have an identity of an immutable characteristic. They just have to have a common purpose that they move towards. And that is what's most important in the discussion. And the lessons behind this longitudinal study, and I've already shared what some of them are, is that quality leadership and teamwork can be achieved and improved by anyone at any age. Obviously, people who probably study childhood development and behavior would probably say, okay, 5-year-olds can't do this. Yes, I agree, 5-year-olds can't do this. I would say this is more for children, for teenagers in high school and early college. Trust and confidence are key both in yourself and your trust in others, what you can put as trust in others. And that you have to develop great personal habits. You have to develop great personal habits. It's really important, and that's why that is italicized, because this isn't, when people talk about leadership, they talk about, oh, it's about your determination. It is about your ability to communicate. It's about all these things. But what are the behaviors that set you up for success on that? Are habits like clearly defining what your values are and setting the stage for these are the things that I value the most, setting the stage for these are the things that I do that set an example for the values that I just clarified, and going on, different personal habits like that. Because determination, when we're talking about, you just happen to have a good communication skills are the consequence of good personal habits that develop into that. It's a consequence. It's not the behavior itself. Good communication isn't a behavior, it's a consequence of other good behaviors that you've done. So this is really important to sort of circle around on that. And what is a longitudinal study? Well, it's a research design featuring repeated data collection and observations on the same variables for a short or long period of time. They are used most often by social scientists and psychologists to study human behavior and changes in human behavior. Most of the time, they are designed to look at many individuals at the same time and to collect observations on each individual within a given time span. This is qualitative research, but that doesn't mean that it is no less important than quantitative research. You can use qualitative research in certain ways, such as through a longitudinal study, in order to come with concrete conclusions, that are of significant importance when it comes to different aspects, specifically of human behavior. Because remember, human behavior isn't really quantifiable, it's really qualifiable. What are the practices of quality leadership that we're going to be talking about? 1, setting the example and self-confidence. It's going to be the next video is going to be on that. Developing specific and achievable goals, creating opportunities and taking risks, creating and growing as a team, and listening and celebrating your team and individual members of your team. Individual recognition is very important. It's very good to celebrate your entire team, but if you focus so much on the group that you forget that you have individual team members that contribute in certain ways, you're going to lose them, because most often your biggest contributors in your group are not people in leadership positions. They are not your president, your vice president of a group. They are not going to be your secretary or your treasurer. They're going to be other key members that show themselves to have individual skill sets that are of extreme importance, and it's important to highlight them and to highlight their contributions to the team. Because remember, people who have leadership titles already have those titles. An individual member doesn't necessarily have that. So it's really important to bring that up. This is just a graphic of that. This looks like a cycle. It is not a cycle. This is just a graphic. All of these are in play at the same time at any given time. They may play off of each other, quote unquote, but they don't necessarily play off of each other directly next to each other as the graphic would suggest. This is just to show you these are the different practices. So what are the personal commitments that also produce quality leadership? Clarifying your values, we talked about that earlier. Setting an example. And these two are really important, and that's why the first video is going to be so important in this playlist. Envisioning your future, enlisting others, searching for opportunities, experiment and take risks, foster collaboration, strengthen others, recognize contributions, and celebrate the values and victories, especially of yourself and others. It's important also to focus on yourself as well, because if you are not clarifying your values, setting an example, or having good self-esteem, you are not going to be able to lead or direct people onto a common vision for a common concrete goal. You're not going to be able to do that. It's going to be impossible. And a lot of people, especially if you were in the public eye and you were debating something, they'll say that you're not setting a good example when you defend yourself on a topic. And we're going to talk about this in the next video with an example I came up with. But that's false, because if you are defending yourself and keeping to a set of morals and ethics and keeping the conversation up here, instead of where people want to drag the conversation down with you, what that's doing is you are setting an example. You're setting an example of how do you deal with complicated situations, conflict. How do you deal with conflict? Conflict resolution is very important because conflict does exist in organizations and out in the public. And it helps to clarify what are the values that you actually care about. If you are setting an example by saying, I don't like X, I don't like this X policy, you clarify these are the values that support that, you're basically reinforcing parts 1 and 2, even if other people are abusing the rest of these, because dark empaths and people of the dark triad do that. If you understand anything that what I'm talking about. If you don't, I would look up those two terms, what a dark empath is and what the dark triad is. They abuse every other aspect of this, but they don't clarify their own values or set their own examples, and so they'll try and drag you down with them when they don't want to have an actual quality conversation or actually engage in quality, appropriate personal behaviors in order to advance a topic into an appropriate direction, and that's really important. What are the personal behaviors of quality leadership? There are 32 behaviors. We'll talk about them in each video. I'm not going to give you all of them at once. That would be way too difficult to grasp. They typically go, this is from the workbook, with this sort of structure, and they're going to be reviewed obviously with each practice as we go in depth, all of the 5 practices, plus the 10 commitments, plus the leadership behaviors. That's just how the book is organized. I'm sure that there's other behaviors and personal responsibilities that people could throw into this, more than 32, but this is just what we're going to talk about because we're using this book as a guide. And we are going to end the video there. This is just a quick overview on the exercises in quality leadership. The next video is on the exercises in quality leadership, self-esteem, and setting an example. Practice number 1, model the way, where I'm going to be talking about setting the example and having self-confidence. We are going to talk about the example that I talked about when it comes to clarifying values and setting an example, and how when you're in conflict resolution or when you're in a state of conflict, when you are having a conflict with somebody, it is important to really focus on clarifying your values in order to set the example, because what they'll often say is that, well, you're not setting a good example when you're defending yourself, yada, yada, yada. Being a good leader doesn't mean that you just roll over and take hits. It does not mean that. It means that you have to set a standard, and you have to keep everybody at that standard with you and to hold the conversation to that standard. It's okay to go into detail, but it's not okay to be deceptive and to bring that conversation to a low level. And that's something we're going to really talk about in the next video. And there we go. That is that, in case you didn't see it before, because I know I had it on the small screen. This is the book that we're using to guide ourselves on the way, from James Kuzus and Barry Posner. And this is the workbook that we will also be sort of bouncing between off of. We'll bounce off between both pieces of reference material. And that is it. That is the introduction into what will be the next series of 5 videos before we get to the conclusion and some of the wrap-up conclusions that I want to address, wrap-up items. That is it. Like, share, and subscribe if you like this content. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all of the new subscribers. And I will see you next time. Thank you. I really appreciate it.